Every week seems to bring with it more bad news for Russia. Ukraine's deep strikes are devastating the country. Long-range drones keep on hitting their targets, despite Russia's claims that it's shooting those drones out of the skies, and Ukraine is varying its approach. Refineries are being set ablaze, ammunition storage units are exploding, and now Ukraine has even turned its sights toward the cargo ships that provide Russia with the parts it needs to build its own long-range drones. The deep strikes keep on coming. Ukraine is bleeding Russia's military dry, and Vladimir Putin can only watch it burn. The period between August 15 and August 19 saw Ukraine carry out a pair of drone strikes against Russia that seriously damaged the country's war machine. The focus first is the latter of those strikes, which leads to the town of Bilokurakyne, which is in the Russian-occupied region of Luhansk. Luhansk is a clear target for Ukraine. It's one of the few Ukrainian regions that Russia can claim to practically outright control. Al Jazeera says that Russia controls around 88% of the Donbas region, in which Luhansk is situated, with practically all of Luhansk now occupied. Reversing that occupation, even if it's only little by little, is one of Ukraine's major goals as it attempts to strip Putin of the leverage that Russia's Donbas occupation gives him in any potential peace negotiations. So there's Bilokurakyne. According to United 24 Media, the Secret Service of Ukraine, or SBU, says that this settlement is situated on a railway line that Russia uses to transport ammunition to its troops on the front lines in the Donbas. This is an example of why Russia's control of Luhansk is so vital to Putin's plans. That control enables the relatively safe usage of these railway lines as part of Russia's larger logistical network, because Russia knows that Ukraine can't launch direct ground assault against its Bilokurakyne position. When the ground isn't an option, the air becomes the best bet for a strike. That's exactly the approach Ukraine took on August 19, as it launched a drone strike against what's become a key logistical node and ammunition storage facility in Luhansk. The SBU provides the details in a Telegram post confirming the success of this strike. Or, as it turns out, there were at least 7 strikes. Long-range SBU drones destroyed 2 ammunition depots of the occupiers in Luhansk region, the SBU statement declares. On the night of August 19, SBU drones staged a cotton at 2 Russian ammunition depots in the settlement of Bilokurakyne in the temporarily occupied Luhansk region. The town is located on an important railway branch, which supplies ammunition from Russia to the front line, in particular to the Pokros direction. United 24 also provides news about the scale of the damage the SBU strikes caused. It says that preliminary reports suggest that Ukraine managed to hit the ammunition depots in Bilokurakyne 7 times in succession, raising the question of what Russia's air defenses were doing. Did they have the night off? Were they even there? Regardless of the answer, Ukraine's 7 strikes triggered a massive fire at the Bilokurakyne base, which United 24 says has been confirmed by the NASA International Satellite Monitoring Service firms. That service tracks fires worldwide, and it found a big one in Bilokurakyne. And that means Russia has no chance of being able to legitimately claim that Ukraine didn't just pull off a damaging drone strike within territory that Russia occupies. The Bilokurakyne strike is part of a larger Ukrainian effort to weaken the Russian war effort, with attacks against the deep rear, as the SBU explains in its Telegram post. The SBU continues systematic strikes in the enemy's rear in order to reduce the offensive capabilities of the Russian army at the front, it says. The destruction of enemy ammunition directly helps our soldiers, who are courageously holding back Russian assaults. The demilitarization of military warehouses and equipment of the occupiers will continue. More destroyed weapons and ammunition mean less pressure on Ukraine's forces. The impact these types of strikes are having will be dug into deeper later in the video. For now, Ukraine's latest drone assault on a key Russian ammunition depot may seem impressive. However, it may also sound familiar. As strange as it may seem, given the position Ukraine was in when Putin first launched his invasion, deep strikes against Russian military targets have become commonplace, almost routine. Bilokurakyne is just the latest to add to a growing pile of successful Ukrainian drone attacks. So, how about something that is a little less routine? That leads to August 15 and the other strike Ukraine has managed to pull off. This one is a doozy because it involves something that Ukraine has never done before, attacking a cargo ship that was carrying Iranian weapons into Russia. It's well known at this point that Iran has been supplying Russia with drones and other weapons since almost the beginning of the Ukraine invasion. Both Russia and Iran might try to deny it, but the evidence is clear. Back in September 2024, Ukraine's foreign ministry claimed that Russia had launched 8,060 Iranian-made Shahed drones at Ukraine since the start of the war. About 2 years before that, the Council on Foreign Relations reported that Russia had received between 600 and 3,000 Shahed drones from Iran less than a year into the war. And it's evident from Russia's drone production that the relationship extends deep enough for Iran to have given Russia permission to build its Shaheds domestically with the help of Iran supplying parts. Adding to this, the US Department of Defense confirmed that Iran has sent Fath 360 close-range ballistic missiles to Russia in a September 2024 post. And as recently as May, Reuters reported that Iran is preparing to deliver launchers for those missiles, allowing Russia to actually use them against Ukraine. One thing is clear, there's a very obvious weapons pipeline between Iran and Russia, and it's that pipeline that Ukraine struck on August 15. The War Zone, or TWZ, reports that Ukraine carried out its daring strike at the port of Olya, which is in Russia's Astrakhan region and located on the Caspian Sea. Specifically, Ukraine's drones touched down on a cargo ship docked at the port that is believed to be responsible for transporting key drone parts via the Caspian Sea between Iran and Russia. Again, it was Ukraine's special forces that were responsible for the strike, as confirmed by the Ukrainian Army's General Staff on Telegram. As part of reducing the enemy's ability to launch airstrikes, on August 14, units of the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in cooperation with other components of the Defense Forces, carried out a fire attack on the seaport Olya, Astrakhan region, Russia, the statement reads. According to available information, the vessel Port Olya 4, loaded with components for the Shahed-type UAV or unmanned aerial vehicle and ammunition from Iran, was hit. Though the precise results of the strike were still being clarified at the time that statement was made, it looks like Ukraine scored a direct hit. Pictures shared by the OSINT Intuit X account show extensive damage to the cargo ship, including blackening of the white paint on the ship's superstructure that indicates a fire. Oh, and the ship just so happens to be sinking. That's pretty solid evidence that Ukraine's drones hit precisely what they were supposed to hit. TWZ adds to the information provided so far, stating that the ship Ukraine just took out was a 400-foot-long cargo vessel that's capable of carrying up to 4,900 tons of cargo. Unconfirmed reports also suggest that there were no Russian casualties in this strike, with the only death being that of the Port Olya 4 ship itself. As for why the ship was targeted, Ukraine's General Staff provides the main reason, namely that the ship is often loaded with Shahed parts and other ammunition that Iran delivers to Russia. Both Ukraine's military intelligence and the US Treasury Department have also confirmed that the Port Olya 4 makes regular journeys between Iran and Russia, meaning that there can be no credible Russian claim that Ukraine just struck a civilian vessel. Even with all of this evidence, Russia tried to trot out its same old excuses. The Astrakhan regional governor claimed that Ukraine's drones had been suppressed by electronic warfare or destroyed, and no damage was caused to the port infrastructure, but a ship was damaged by debris from a downed UAV. Again, with a debris excuse. That claim has been made countless times by Russia during the Ukraine war, and it never holds water. Drone debris doesn't sink ships. It might set fires, but it doesn't scuttle massive cargo vessels. The reality that Russia wants to deny is that within 4 days, Ukraine has managed to pull off amazing deep strikes. The attack on the Bilokurakyne ammunition depot was already impressive enough, not least because it means that Russia can't send the ammo that Ukraine destroyed to its soldiers on the front lines. However, the strike on the Port Olya 4 may be the most damaging in the long term. An expensive Russian ship, likely part of the country's shadow fleet, is sinking, and it may be taking valuable ammunition and drone components from Iran down with it. However, mentioned at the start of this video was that Ukraine strikes are helping to bleed Russia dry. Explaining what that means requires a wider look at what these strikes and other attacks like them mean for Russia in the Ukraine war. The SBU's post about the Bilokurakyne strike provides a pretty big hint, as it points out that Ukraine's deep strikes against Russia are all designed to weaken Russia militarily. Whether Ukraine is taking out ammunition directly or hitting the logistical assets that carry that ammunition, along with fuel and other supplies, these types of strikes exist to challenge Russia's strategic depth. That's according to the Bloomsbury Intelligence and Security Institute, which published an article on June 24 written by analyst Tom Hayward, writing about Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb, which saw it sneak drones into Russian territory so they could strike airfields containing some of Russia's most important strategic bombers. Hayward says that it's asymmetric tactics like these that are proving ever more vital as the Ukraine war draws closer to the 4-year mark. Hayward points out what these types of strikes mean from Russia on a strategic level in the medium and long term. In the medium term, which Hayward says is between 3 and 12 months, Ukraine's innovative asymmetric tactics will likely force Moscow to increase defensive measures in the rear and pull assets away from the front lines to prevent further attacks, Hayward says. That's an interesting point. While the immediate impact of both of the strikes discussed in this video is that fewer drones and less ammunition will make their way into Ukraine, these strikes forcing Russia to pull assets back into its own territory is also a massive win. The fewer of those assets that are on the front lines, the less pressure Russia can exert on Ukraine's defenses. The long-term future, assuming Ukraine continues these strikes, is also bleak for Russia, Hayward says. The country's strategic depth will be challenged by these types of strikes, forcing Russia into investing heavily in hardened and underground facilities to protect the assets Ukraine is hitting. That might be fine for ammunition depots. However, that approach isn't going to protect ships docked in ports. Plus, Russia is hardly flush with cash right now due to Putin already having spent billions on the Ukraine war. Business Insider says that Russia is on course to run out of its financial reserves by the fall of 2025, meaning it's almost drained its emergency funds. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, also noted back in March that Ukraine's deep strikes between September 2024 and February 12, 2025 alone had cost Russia $714 million. And those strikes have grown more frequent. The cost to Russia since February could well be around the $1 billion mark. So, investing in the type of equipment Russia needs to protect the assets Ukraine is targeting might be considered a low priority when Russia needs to funnel as much cash into equipment that serves its troops on the ground. That can only be good news for Ukraine's future deep strikes. United 24 Media also points out that Russia's sheer size is playing against it in this department. Russia is a country that accounts for 11% of the world's landmass, and it spans more than 6.5 million square miles. Granted, a lot of Russia is devoid of suitable military targets or unreachable by Ukraine's drones. However, the country has a lot of territory that it needs to protect, and the fact that Ukraine is experiencing so much success with its deep strikes tells us that Russia isn't doing a good job at that protection. Ukraine's drones keep breaking through, and now, as seen on August 15 with a strike against a cargo ship, it's getting more ambitious about the types of targets on which it focuses. Long story short, every successful deep strike takes Ukraine one step closer to bleeding Russia's military dry. Now, focus on the Bilokurakyne strike for a moment, specifically what the strike targeted: Russian ammunition. Throughout 2025, there have been conflicting reports about Russia's ammunition situation. Back in February, Al Jazeera posed the question of whether Russia is starting to run out of ammunition. It noted that Russia certainly seemed to be running short of armored vehicles, having started to resort to using donkeys to shuttle ammo across the battlefield. The outlet also noted that Russia's attempted occupation of the Donbas region has slowed to a crawl, with a shortage of artillery rounds seeming to be the cause. Russia seemed to be trying to solve the problem. However, despite a growing shortage of artillery, Russia has tripled the output of shells to about 3 million a year, while North Korea has reportedly supplied millions more, the outlet wrote, while also pointing out that Russia has received hundreds of missiles from Iran and North Korea. A few months later, the Financial Times suggested that Russia's military is now receiving the majority of its ammunition from North Korea. That's a strange situation for a country supposedly building 3 million artillery shells a year to be in. To add to the confusion, Business Insider said in June that NATO chief Mark Rutte says that Russia is making as much ammunition in 3 months as NATO manufacturers in a year. However, that's all relative. What amounts to 4 times as much ammunition being made compared to NATO still only leads to 200 new Iskander missiles in 2025, for example. It's inaccurate to say that Russia is running out of ammunition, but it's certainly having to rely on other countries to provide a large amount of the ammo it's using. There are also hints that its domestic production isn't as strong as it needs to be, at least in terms of allowing Russia to maintain the strength and frequency of its artillery assaults on Ukraine. So any attack on an ammunition depot means that Ukraine is depriving its enemy of ammo that it appears to sorely need. Russia can afford to lose some ammo, however, it can't afford to lose too much. And that's what's going to happen as Ukraine focuses more intently on its deep strike strategy. It's also hard to ignore the fact that the cargo ship Ukraine scuttled on August 15 is reputed to have transferred ammunition, likely missiles from Iran, in addition to drones. That's another knock against Russia's possibly precarious ammunition situation. And speaking of drones, that leads back to the Port Olya 4. If hitting ammunition depots and conducting more deep strikes is supposed to weaken Russia on the ground, the destruction of the Port Olya 4 is intended to make it harder for Russia to hit Ukraine with long-range Shahed drones, and Russia has been doing a lot of that lately. According to an AFP analysis, Russia broke its record for long-range drone attacks against Ukraine in July 2025. It says that Russia sent 6,297 long-range UAVs into Ukraine that month, with 6,129 of those drones being Shahed types. Compare that to the same month in 2024 when Russia launched 423, and it's clear that Putin's drone campaign has intensified. It's also not going to slow down until Ukraine does something about it. On August 19, ABC News reported that Russia launched an aerial assault against Ukraine that included 270 drones just days after US President Donald Trump met with Putin in Alaska. And according to TWZ, Russia is now using its Shahed drones to drop anti-tank mines deep behind the Ukrainian front lines. These drones are a persistent problem for Ukraine. By taking out one of the cargo ships that transports the parts used to make those drones, Ukraine hopes it can reduce the intensity of these drone attacks. Of course, one ship being scuttled alone won't do the trick. However, taking out the Port Olya 4 represents Ukraine adding another string to its bow, as it's just proven that it can hit Russian cargo ships when they dock from a very long way away. That means more strikes against Russian ships and ports are bound to happen. There have already been more than one might have expected in 2025, Reuters reported on August 15. While the attack on the Port Olya 4 was the first of its kind in terms of Ukraine hitting a cargo ship that sails between Iran and Russia, it's made hitting Russia's terminals and ports a priority this year. Reuters says that these two types of targets account for 7% of Ukraine's successful strikes against Russian territory in 2025, with some of Ukraine's longest strikes hitting targets up to 621 miles away. Reuters also reported on an interesting financial figure that showcases just how Ukraine is bleeding Russia dry with its deep strikes. Mentioned earlier was a report that said Ukraine costs Russia over $700 million with its deep strikes between September 2024 and February 2025. According to Reuters, Ukraine thinks that figure needs to be multiplied by around 100 to get the actual cost of its deep strikes against Russia in 2025. A staggering $74.1 billion is the amount that Ukraine says it has cost Russia with the types of long-range attacks seen on August 15 and August 19. Reuters say that Ukraine didn't explain how it reached that figure. It may have been inflated. But even if it is, the point made earlier still stands, that Ukraine is draining cash away from Russia that Putin simply can't afford to lose as he struggles to fund the war that he started. So, taking out an ammunition depot and a cargo ship, as impressive as both of these strikes may be, isn't enough for Ukraine to bleed Russia dry. However, when these strikes are taken in the context of Ukraine's wider deep strike strategy and how intensive that strategy has become in 2025, it's apparent that the strikes are pieces in a large puzzle that Ukraine is putting together. The more of those pieces that are slotted into place, the weaker the Russian military becomes. And all Putin can do is watch as his war machine burns around him. Now, these strikes are also evidence that Ukraine is several steps ahead of Russia when it comes to drones, and with Ukraine's strikes on Russia's oil refineries adding up, Russia is finding out that it's losing the UAV war and it's too late for Putin to do anything about it. Find out what we mean in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's latest deep strikes.